What's going on, guys? We are coming to you live here. This is going to be Flesh and Blood TCG. This is the finals of the West Coast Playtest League Season 2. So this time it was going to be myself against Ruby. Ruby is a strong Guardian player. Some of you may have seen him playing on the Discord server. This was being played on Tabletop Simulator, and this game is getting off to a strong start. My opponent using Bravo's ability at the very beginning to come in here with Dominate, coming in at Strength 11. It's 11 Dominate. Now, the plus side is I am going to probably, this is probably going to hit me, and I'm going to have to discard 2 cards, but I'm going to draw those cards right back. So I do end up taking 8 damage here, or... yeah, 8 damage here, and then I discard 2 cards at random, losing some good cards. So not exactly how I want to start off the game, but on the plus side, I'm going to draw them right back, so it's not as terrible for my tempo as getting hit with a Crippling Crush would normally be. So with that, we're going to go to my turn. So this is an interesting matchup, Warrior versus Guardian. So in this situation, I think that the Guardian player often has a bit of an advantage here. The way that you can play Guardian with a lot of control and a lot of big defense reactions can be difficult for Warrior to deal with. However, I have taken a build that is a little different. The build that I'm running is running some of the go wide type stuff, which is going to allow it, at least in theory, to outmaneuver some of the options that the Guardian might have. Like maybe I'm going to come in there with my unconditional go again and my Dawnblade, opponent blocks up, and then I'm going to play an attack action card. In that situation, I just try to break through normally with a attack reaction, but my opponent counters it, so it's over to him, but I did get some cards out of his hand. And he goes for the simple hammer swing. So basically, the way that Guardian wants to play this matchup is pretty straightforward. Guardian is going to want to make just very basic attacks, so Guardian can throw out a Nothos for either 4 damage or 6 damage, depending on situational factors. And a Nothos for 4 or a Nothos for 6, both of those are things that are kind of going to merit a block simply because they are going to be threatening some substantial damage that will wear you down over time. Now, sometimes you are going to want to just take the damage if you have a really big turn of your own coming up, but in other occasions, it's going to be better to block up and kind of preserve some of your tempo and momentum. So in this situation, I decide I'm just going to block, and what I want to do on this next turn is I'm just going to throw out the CNC that I have in Arsenal, because that will allow me to Arsenal my red Steelblade Shunt here, which is going to be a useful thing against some of the big attacks that Guardian has to offer. So I go for the double pitch. I'm also pitching 2 good attack reactions this turn, which is something that I like to see because it means that I'm going to have those for the late game. This Warrior versus Guardian matchup tends to be very defensive, and for that reason, you often want to preserve threats and some of the more powerful cards in your deck for later on in the game, because there is a risk of just running out of threats against a Guardian who's defending heavily. So my opponent is going to come in with a Command and Conquer of his own, and I really don't want this to hit me here because I do have the copy of Steelblade Shunt Red in Arsenal. I end up going just for a double block, and then I'm going to use this. I'm going to just go for the E-Strike 7 here. And E-Strike 7 is going to allow me to threaten some damage and also put that out for blood, another strong attack reaction towards the bottom of the deck. And I'm just trying to, I'm trying to maintain those threats for later on in the game. And against this, it's fairly likely if he has a big defense reaction in Arsenal, he might just play that, especially if he has another defense reaction that he can swap in for it. Otherwise, we might just see block with 2 cards, take 1, but I am trying to at least do some damage and prevent him from getting a full hand. ZSparkXX says, "Good evening, Tower number 9. Yeah, good to see you. I'm happy to be streaming here tonight. I've been a little less consistent recently, thanks to a bunch of events and so on that I've been playing in, but happy to be out here streaming this one." Okay, so in this situation, my opponent does go for the big defense reaction. He has a staunch response in Arsenal and is going to play that to block the whole thing. I'm kind of fine with that. That is another one of his, best reaction cards used up in a situation where it's not going to be blocking out my Dawnblade. So one thing that I like to do in this matchup is if I'm throwing out a bunch of small things and threatening various attacks, hopefully I can knock some of the stuff out of his hand or out of his deck as a whole, really, and get into a position where my later attacks will be less, will have less stuff able to defend them. So he's coming in with a Mangle here. The on-hit effect doesn't do anything because this is the one, I believe this is the one that destroys an item that has or destroys a piece of equipment that has a -1 counter on it. But I nevertheless decide that I'm going to use the Steel Blade Shunt that I have in Arsenal. Normally I might save that for a higher impact attack, but in this situation I've decided, you know what, I'm gonna throw that out there, and I have it in Arsenal and I have the Tunic charged up, and we're going to see what happens from there. So then I'm going to go for, I'm not going to go for the Iron Song Determination play here. So Iron Song Determination is a really good card, but at this point, my opponent still has a lot of armor and still may well have a defense reaction. I'm wanting to save that Iron Song Determination for later on in the game, when I might be in a situation where my opponent is out of defense reactions and his armor is depleted, at which point it has a much higher chance of getting me that hit. Now, I think I may have actually pitched wrong here. I think it would have been better to pitch the Iron Song Determination in this situation to do this, because that would guarantee that it's going to go later on, whereas depending on what he does here, I might not actually have a chance to pitch it. If I can get a hit with this attack, maybe by buffing it with the Razor Reflex, I can of course pitch the Iron Song Determination at that time, but my opponent does go for an overblock here, which indicates that I'm not going to get a chance to spend the Iron Song Determination. It's going to stay in hand, so I should have really pitched that instead of the hit and run there. Just a minor mistake, but it's important to note those, those little mistakes can add up. Now, the plus side of what I did is that if there were a situation where my opponent blocked for just 6, I could play the Razor Reflex without pitching another card, still have the Iron Song Determination, and then if he didn't have a defense reaction, pitch that, or I could Arsenal it, but I actually don't want to Arsenal it, so the value of holding it in hand in that situation is lower than it might seem. Okay. This time my opponent swings. In and does manage to hit me, and that is because I've decided I'm going to try to make a push with the Iron Song Determination and Steel Blade Supremacy. So these two cards combine relatively well together. I think the fact that he overblocked last turn might indicate that the card that he has in Arsenal is not an attack reaction. Typically, we often see people blocking normally against normal attacks and only overblocking if there is a attack reaction. So my plan here is maybe my Steel Blade Supremacy plus Iron Song Determination will be able to get in. I do have that Razor Reflex waiting, so I'm coming in for 6 with Dominate, and if it hits, draw a card. And I can potentially use my Refraction Bolters to give it go again. Now, I did make an error here, which is that I went for no block against the Hammer Swing last turn. I think that under those circumstances, I actually should have blocked with the Refraction Bolters, because now if I'm going to score this hit and use it, I will have wasted the armor block of that. So my opponent blocks for 3, which means he gets hit for 3, and then I'm going to break the Refraction Bolters there to give my attack go again. And I'm looking at what I have here. So I do have a Steel Blade Shunt blue in hand. That's likely going to be something that I'm going to want to pitch so that I can use the Brave Forge Bracers and then swing my weapon as well. This is going to threaten another Strength 6 attack. So this is going to be another Strength 6 with Dominate, and if it hits, I will draw a card and get a +1 counter. So 2 energy floating, and I do have that Razor Reflex to potentially back it up. And actually, this isn't just Strength 6, it's now Strength 7 because of the Brave Forge Bracers. So this is going to be annoying for him to defend against. He may use both, he can't actually defend 7 even if he uses both of his pieces of armor, so he only opts to defend for 3. So in this situation, assuming that he doesn't play a defense reaction from Arsenal, I currently am, in fact, going to score my draw and my second counter. I go for a Glint because the Glint will give me a card draw, and it's conceivable that the card draw from this Glint will hit an attack action, a potion, or a Twinning Blade, all of which would allow me to actually make a 3rd attack this turn. It doesn't, it hits an Out for Blood, but I'm fine with that, and I play the Out for Blood for stats. So, my attack is now at Strength 10, and he's blocking 3, so he actually takes 7 damage, and I trigger the Dawnblade, and I trigger the draw. Unfortunately, I don't draw a card that is going to be able to be used with my Go Again from the Quicksilver, so that ended up being, less effective than it could have been, but I do have a Red Warrior's Valor, which is one of the absolutely best cards to pair with a Dawnblade that has a counter, because it puts you over that crucial breakpoint up to 7. Now, my opponent comes in with an Anothos swing for 6, and I'm thinking about what to do here. I do actually have a Twinning Blade, which means that the Warrior's Valor is less necessary than it seems, but I may try to do it anyway to try to break through at 7 plus that. I end up deciding, no, I can block with the Warrior's Valor. Normally I would love it, but I'll block with it and take 3 here, and then I have the option with my attack to pitch that Overpower, Spoils of War into Dawnblade for 6, and then potentially Twinning Blade and do it again, or potentially try to break through with Razor. Now, I actually make a really big mistake there. I don't know what that was. It was some kind of lag or fat finger, but I accidentally dragged the Twinning Blade out of my hand a bit instead of the Overpower. So now my opponent knows what I can do here, and that's really unfortunate. Twinning Blade is definitely a card that can take people by surprise. I think most people are not used to it yet. So basically, Twinning Blade just means that you can swing your weapon an additional time. But in this sort of situation, when you have an unconditional go again and a counter on the Dawnblade, this might be a situation where normally an opponent would overblock heavily. So let's say in this situation, my opponent was like, oh man, I've got to stop this, and he overblocks 9. If I then play the Twinning Blade and swing with my Dawnblade for an additional 4, I may be putting him in a position where I can no longer, where he can no longer easily defend. If he overblocked the first one, then the second one can maybe sneak in there and maintain my token. Twinning Blade also works really well with buffs that last for the whole turn, so Ironsong Determination and Steel Blade Supremacy being the main ones, but there's more of a risk in some of those situations. So my opponent goes for a double block, which means that I'm going to try for the Razor Reflex instead of using the Twinning Blade, and unfortunately he does, I believe, have a defense reaction here that he can use to stop it. So Razor Reflex is taking me up by 3. I now have 9, and so I'm going to break in for 3. But there is the chance, yep, and there it is, a sink below from hand, and that does mean that my opponent is going to be able to stop this, so I do play the Twinning Blade on my Dawnblade, and then I'll be able to use my Fyendal Spring Tunic to swing again for 4, and unfortunately, because my opponent has a lot of armor remaining, he is going to be able to stop this even if he doesn't have a card that blocks for 4, but I am going to be able to use up all of his hand and stuff, so at least I'll get the tempo advantage out of the Twinning Blade, even if I'm not getting actual damage through at this point. Yeah, so he ends up blocking it with a piece of his armor and with his last card from hand, which does knock the counter off my Dawnblade. Unfortunate, but I did manage to get all of the cards out of his hand, which means I now have a free turn, and my opponent is just going to draw up. So shout out, by the way, to Dazwadan and to Prop Joe 84 who followed the stream in between my last stream and this one. Much appreciated, guys. And so now we're going to be looking at the actual next turn here, where I have, so I have a Hit and Run, a Glint, a Red Shunt, and a Flock of the Featherwalkers. And so the awkward part about this, so I could go for just swinging and not having the, I could go for just swinging and waiting for the Glint to give me the go again and potentially a draw. The problem is that I think that there's a good chance that my opponent won't block against a Dawnblade swing with nothing else. Now, Dawnblade swing with nothing else into Glint is often a good way to bait out a defense reaction. But I wouldn't get the card draw that would allow me to potentially hide the Flock of the Featherwalkers here. So I go for the standard swing. He does block with 1 card, and then I'm going to Flock of the Featherwalkers. It does show him that I have this Red Shunt, which is not something that I normally want to do because those Red Shunts are kind of precious, but I've decided in this situation, you know, putting the Red Shunt in Arsenal is good. Maybe I'll play it earlier than I would otherwise in order to get it out of there and reduce his information, but I am going to be coming in there for the extra 5 damage, and it does have, it does give me a quicken token for go again, so I'm trying to just kind of put him in an awkward position. Flock of the Featherwalkers Red is a really good card for this style of deck because not only is it itself an attack that has a fair amount of damage, it's also an attack that is going to be buffing up your next turn. I've even considered playing Flock of the Featherwalkers Yellow because 4 is still above the critical threshold. Yeah, so here we see like a weird glitch. I don't actually know what caused this, but my opponent took the damage, and then like for some reason after he had moved his mouse off of the life counter, it kept counting down. So he ended up taking, I think, 8 damage there instead of 5, and unfortunately neither of us caught that at the time. I don't know what caused that to happen. And so then he plays a Sigil of Solace and only goes up 2. That time I think I do catch it and say that he should have an additional point of life, but it only like makes up for the extra damage that he took erroneously. So I don't know what caused that. I think it may have just been some lag. When I play games in when I've been playing games in the skirmish events, I've been using like physical written down life counters so I can track the changes. And this situation has made me think that I should be doing the same for these tournaments as well, simply because that way I can keep better track of the life total. And you will avoid situations like this where, thanks to lag or whatever reason, someone doesn't change their life as much as they should. So that's an unfortunate case, but it is what happened there. So I end up going for a Flock of the Featherwalkers, revealing a Twinning Blade. So Flock of the Featherwalkers into Flock of the Featherwalkers is really annoying, because now this Flock of the Featherwalkers has Go Again, which means that this Quicken token is going to actually be available on this turn. So I'm essentially going to get multiple Go Agains just from these Flock of the Featherwalker cards. And so my opponent opts to just take the damage here from the, he just opts to take the damage there from the second Flock of the Featherwalkers, and I'm then going to throw out a Dawnblade Swing. So the Dawnblade Swing is going to be for 3 with Go Again. He knows that I have the Twinning Blade because I showed him that, and I intentionally showed him the weaker card in this situation. The Singing Steel Blade here is, I actually think, better for breaking through. And so my hope here is that he thinks that I'm going to go for the Twinning Blade into an extra swing. Actually, Twinning Blade into an extra swing right now isn't all that good. The reason being that I don't have any, and the reason being that I don't really have any other buff on the Dawnblade, so it would let me swing again, but I wouldn't necessarily get that much out of it. However, I could instead try to break through with Singing Steel Blade and try to get the damage through for take the second swing the normal way. So he ends up blocking 5 with 1 card plus a copy of Arcanite Skullcap. And so I do go for the Singing Steel Blade here, and my goal is going to be to try to break through. I'm going to find, I think I find Out for Blood. Or I look at it first, see that I have 1 left. Yeah, and so the reason I'm playing Out for Blood red here is because with Reprise active, this is going to give my next attack +1, so if it gets through, then I can swing for 4. Unfortunately, my opponent does have a defense reaction available to counter it, so he is able to prevent me from getting that second swing. If I had the Twinning Blade still, because I had more energy, I could play it, and it would get the +1 to the second swing from Out for Blood. But in this situation, it doesn't really end up panning out. However, I nevertheless have made him use another defense reaction and gotten some damage through with that first Flock of the Featherwalkers. So overall, not bad. I also did some damage to his armor. So in this situation, I'm not feeling so bad about this. Just in terms of assessing the overall state of the game, right now I'm ahead on life. I believe I'm ahead on armor as well. And I am ahead on tempo. So that seems to me to be a pretty good situation. However, I know that Ruby is a strong opponent. In fact, I think that my record against him with him playing Guardian is quite unfavorable. And I didn't stream this game because it wasn't all that exciting, but there was an earlier game in the Swiss rounds of this event where we had actually met up and he defeated me very easily. I don't know exactly what happened. You know, I felt like my deck was not putting out the pressure that it normally does. You know, maybe just some poor draws or me playing it wrong or whatever it was, but in our earlier match I found myself taking a lot of damage and not really making very much progress. So in this situation he comes in for 6 and I decided to block for 3. The reason being, this way I'm going to duck to be 1 life less than him, and that's going to allow me to throw out Scar for a Scar for 4 with Go Again, a classic pressure card here. And so I go for the Scar for a Scar coming in for 4 with Go Again. Scar is a really good card, so the red Scar for a Scar is 0 cost, strength 4, it only blocks for 2, which is bad, but if you have less life than your opponent, it gains Go Again, so it's a really strong card in a wide archetype, because you're essentially throwing out some damage that is going to have Go Again, and you can just throw it into the start or the middle or whatever of another turn. And with this sort of deck, if it's not active because you have more life than them, you can still play it at the end of something else. Like I could do Spoils of War swing, my opponent blocks heavily, and I play the Scar for a Scar just for the 4 damage, so it's still going to be at least somewhat annoying. I then use the Go Again to play an energy potion, and the reason that I did that instead of going for a weapon swing is that I'm just trying to get set up here. And I know that my opponent, I know that I have the red shunt in Arsenal, so that's going to be able to allow me to survive even if he does a big turn. Now, he does pitch an unmovable here, which is pretty good. Wizard of Alf says, forgot to shuffle from Singing Steel Blade. Oh, man, did I? I'm going to have to go back and check that. It is possible that I did forget, in which case I am very sorry. Luckily, I more or less immediately started typing in to see what I had and did not actually make note of the card order or whatever, but that is quite bad if so. Thank you for the heads up. I'm gonna have to go back after this. I'm gonna have to go back after this video is over and check that to make sure. Okay, so then I am going to swing Dawnblade for 3. And this turn I'm going for just a Dawnblade swing. I don't really have that much, so I did end up using that red shunt in Arsenal last turn. Normally I wouldn't have necessarily used it for something like that, but I knew that he knew that I had it, and I wanted to get it out there and also start my Tunic charging up again. So this time I'm just swinging the Dawnblade, and I have the option to buff it with a Singing Steelblade here. I also have the option to play a Remembrance from hand, and I have that Razor Reflex as well. So I'm just thinking about what to do here. I'm looking to see how many glints I've used. I've only used 1, so if he blocks with 1 card, my best play here is probably Singing Steelblade into glint, which is a really annoying play because it ducks in to get over the opponent's block by 1 and gives you the go again and gives you a draw. I think that's a very strong combination. One of the things that I found that can be really annoying against an opponent with a lot of defense reactions is playing small attack reactions that are going to allow you to just barely sneak in over a block. So an example of that would be, you know, if I'm coming in at strength 6, my opponent blocks for 6, and I play, you know, blue Iron Song Response and go up to 7. Then the opponent has to decide, do I want to spend a powerful reaction on this? So here's a little thing that I do. So he does block with 1 card. I decide that I'm actually going to play a Remembrance before I play the before I do my glint into what's it called, or a Singing Steelblade into glint combo, because I want to get some of my big attack actions in there so that if he has a defense reaction to stop my attack, I'm going to be able to play to use one of the attack actions that I just put in there. So I think it was 2 E-strikes and a CNC. I then play glint. So he does opt to counter it with a Sink Below here. I haven't taken my draw yet. I end up taking the draw, and unfortunately I see another Remembrance, which is really not what I want to see here. So right now I am at 7, and my opponent is at 7. And unfortunately my plan to increase my top deck odds has really backfired, as I drew another Remembrance, which is one of the least useful cards I could have here. So if I had another attack reaction, I could try to break through. If I had another attack reaction, I could try to break through. If I had another attack action, I could try to get him with it. But ultimately, I don't, and I end up going for... I do end up playing out the Remembrance here. I'm taking 2 Spoils of War because that's a really strong card, and 1 copy of Steelblade Supremacy as well. I was thinking about a Warrior's Valor red, but ended up going with the Supremacy. All right, so luckily I think I shuffled correctly all of those times. I'm gonna have to go back and watch that and make sure and check whether or not I shuffled incorrectly on that first one, because that would be very embarrassing if so. But I was keeping more of an eye on it, and I did shuffle correctly for all of those at least. It's interesting. Tabletop Simulator makes shuffling way easier, but it also makes it easier to forget whether or not you've actually done it because it's just a key press. Okay, so then my opponent is going to come in here with just a Nothos swing. I believe it's for 6, but I am not 100% sure. This turn I have a relatively good... yeah, so it was a swing for 6. I block for 3 and take 3. So then on this turn I have a... I can do E-strike into Razor Reflex and then potentially another swing. And my E-strike is also going to allow me to put this Route on the bottom of my deck. So Route is a great card in the end game, but at this time I don't yet want to have it. So I just go for I think I go for E-strike 7 here, and then I'm going to try to buff it with a Razor Reflex in order to potentially break through and allow me to have go again, which is then going to allow for a Dawnblade swing just to chip some more damage in. So that's my current game plan for this turn. I could have gone for the go again to allow this to be more reliable, but I want to opt for the bigger damage here. And see what that gets me. My opponent's thinking about his block. I really like the versatility of E-Strike. It's a card, even if you draw like an all-red hand, you're still usually able to get some good plays out of the E-Strike. And it can be, the one downside to it is it does essentially take 2 cards. But, you know, it can be well worth it because you're really getting something that's quite above curve in exchange for that. Although it depends on how you compute the second card. I think it works better if you have a deck with more red. So my opponent actually plays an unmovable here. And I end up using my energy potion to do the Razor Reflex. The reason that I do this is because now I'll be able to arsenal that Steel Blade Shunt. And he actually spends another defense reaction on this with a Fate Foreseen. So even though he stopped this, I'm actually not that sad about that. My follow-up was just going to be a Dawnblade Swing for 3, and I've now gotten 2 more of his defense reactions out of the deck. Sometimes this sort of matchup, like their defense reaction count versus your attack reaction count, becomes very important as it reaches the later game. So in this situation, my opponent is just going to pitch and swing an Othos for 4. So I'm thinking about what to do here. I'm sorry. Yeah, I think he just pitches and swings an Othos for 4. So I have actually a kind of awkward hand here, and as a result of that, I end up deciding that I'm going to use the blue shunt that I put in Arsenal to block the attack fully and deal 1 damage to him, pitching a red Valor. And the reason that I do that is I want to have that red Valor saved for later on. I don't have very good follow-up for the red Valor because I don't have any attack reaction this turn. So this turn, what I'm going to be able to do is pitch that Time Snap to throw out a Command and Conquer. That's probably going to get 2 cards out of his hand, and then I can arsenal the copy of Snatch. So that was sort of an example of a time when I saw that I had an awkward hand and decided to defend a little more than I would have normally in order to throw out what is now an okay turn, not a great turn, you know, just a CNC, very easy to just stop that with 2 cards. I'm not running Lunging Press, and then but I will be able to arsenal a card and be in a decent spot. It's kind of interesting, too, the way that some of this stuff works. So Command and Conquer is a very strong card, but when you're just playing it on its own, it's relatively easy for somebody to stop, at least if they're from a class that has a lot of 3 block. So in this situation, all I'm really doing is going to be taking 2 cards out of his hand in all likelihood, but that is enough to mean that he won't be able to do one of his really big attacks. So, you know, I'm happy with that. He could also let it hit him, but that's a lot of damage, and it would also take that card out of Arsenal, so I'm pretty happy about this. Even though it's not an incredibly threatening turn, I'm thinking that I'm still going to get some good value. So he ends up actually blocking with 3 cards. He has a Lunging Press and a Tome of Fyendal, and also blocks with his armor, which is interesting. I don't know what else is in his hand. It might mean that he has like instants or something in his hand, and therefore can't block it efficiently, or it might just mean that he's trying to save what he has. And I see that he has, so he had one of his cards was a defense reaction, which meant that he couldn't play it, and so therefore he was not able to block with just 2 cards. He had to block with 3 things, and he opted to block with 2 cards plus the equipment instead of 2 cards plus the attack that he had in hand. And that's going to allow him to do a swing of an Othos for 4. I block with a copy of Snatch. I actually have, so it's only blocking for 2, but I actually have another copy of Snatch in Arsenal, which I want to play here. And the other copy of Snatch in my hand is maybe going to go into Arsenal if the first one doesn't land. So this is a pretty good situation for me with Spoils of War into a swing for 5. This is something that my opponent might well want to block because I'm threatening that potential Dawnblade swing to get my counter. So he's going to try to block it out to prevent me from getting Dorinthea's ability, and then I'm going to be able to follow that up with a copy of Snatch. So he goes for the double block. I wish he had overblocked here. If he overblocked that, I would feel like I was in a better position. But he goes for the double block there, and then here comes the copy of Snatch for 4 if it hits draw a card. I do have my Tunic charged up, as well as 1 resource, so there is the chance that I would have Razor Reflex and be able to do something scary. He counters me with a Sink Below, but I'm happy about that because it means that he has, once again, one of his defense reactions out of the game, and I'm able to put the other copy of Snatch into Arsenal. So the card draw from Snatch there probably wouldn't even have been that good for me, and if my opponent had just blocked with 1 card for 3 and I had gotten an inconsequential card draw, that probably would have been a better outcome for me than if he had used a defense reaction, which are precious. So in this situation, though, my opponent has picked up a fair life lead. It's currently 18 to 13. But on the other hand, I have retained a lot more armor than he has. So right now I still have a guaranteed 5 block and potentially up to 7 block from my armor, whereas he has 1 and potentially 2. So the life totals are actually a lot closer than they seem. Alright, so I'm going to lead off with the classic Scar for a Scar, coming in for 4 with Go Again. Good way to just throw out some more damage, get some threats going. And I do have the Razor Reflex in hand, so my plan is going to be to Scar for a Scar, use the copy of Snatch that I have in Arsenal, and then try to break through with Razor Reflex. Yeah, so then Scar for a Scar into that copy of Snatch. Snatch coming in for 4 after he blocked the Scar for 3. So he could block this for 4 very easily. All he has to do is use 1 card and a piece of armor. But armor is, I'm hoping that I can wear out his armor because it makes it harder for him to block me later on. One tactic that can be very good against Warrior is blocking using only armor or only armor plus cards that are in, or only armor plus a defense reaction from Arsenal. And if you do it that way, that is going to allow you to threaten the opponent substantially more. So I come in with the Razor Reflex for 4. He doesn't block, and then I do play, or I come in with this. He comes in with a Snatch for 4. I come in with a Snatch for 4. He doesn't block, and I play the Razor, getting the hit, and I top deck a CNC, and then use my Tunic to play it. This was a really lucky top deck because it makes this turn have way more pressure than it did previously. In this situation, the fact that he didn't block against the Snatch might indicate that he was hoping to just take damage and throw out a big attack, but now with Command and Conquer coming out, he's going to have to block that or lose his card in Arsenal, and it's potentially going to cost him a lot of momentum for the next turn. So that was a very lucky top deck. He is, of course, able to stop it because he was conserving those cards, but it's going to mean, this turn, instead of doing, I don't know what he has in Arsenal, but instead of doing potentially a big play from Arsenal, or instead of doing, create a token and then pitch and then swing the hammer for 6, he's going to just pitch a single card and swing the hammer for 4. And now I'm thinking about how I want to block against it and how I want to attack for this upcoming turn. I end up blocking with a Steelblade Supremacy here. And I am ahead of my opponent on life, which means the Scar for a Scar doesn't have Go Again, but I have a nice little combo here where I'm going to be able to throw out Spoils of War coming in for 5 with unconditional Go Again, and if my opponent blocks this, I can then play that Scar for a Scar for 4, and we're getting low enough on life that blocking Scar for a Scar is becoming higher and higher priority, simply because at this point my opponent has to be kind of concerned about the prospect of getting hit with, hit and going to low life. He double blocks the spoils, and I play Scar for a Scar for 4. So he could just take it and go to 6 here. But this is, we're in the danger zone. This is definitely a time when one has to consider more blocks. And he does actually opt to block with 1 card plus his Skullcap. I think he's thinking here that he doesn't know if he's going to get a chance to use that Skullcap again, so he's taking the Skullcap block where he can find it. Obviously, Scar for a Scar doesn't have an on-hit effect, and it's a low-priority block under normal circumstances, but it could be that blocking that with that Skullcap, if he thinks that he's not going to get it otherwise, that 1 point of life could be key. So now he's going to swing Anothos at me for 4. And I'm looking at my hand here, so I kind of want to keep this hand. I kind of want to keep this whole hand because it allows me to potentially threaten a breakthrough with Steelblade Supremacy, so I end up taking 4, even though the life totals are really low. This does also put me below him, which means that if he stops this completely, my own Skullcap will be active. I go for a hit and run into Steelblade Supremacy into a Dawnblade Swing for 5. If it hits draw a card, it does have Go Again, and I have an Iron Song response to try to break through if he goes for a close block. So this is a very aggressive situation for me. There is the chance that he still has some defense reaction or that he has an overblock, especially if the card in his arsenal is a big defense reaction. I could be in some trouble here, but it will at the very least get that out and put me in a relatively good spot. He ends up going for the triple block here, so it is the overblock, indicating the card in Arsenal is probably not a defense reaction. But then I'm actually kind of fine with that because it means I get to Arsenal an attack reaction and to buff up my next turn, and then his next turn is very limited, so all he does is a hammer swing for 4. And to be fair, at 7 life, I'm not exactly thrilled to see a hammer swing for 4. But I'm thinking about what I have to offer here. So I have, again, a pretty aggressive hand. So one thing that I could do right now is, I have that Flock of the Featherwalkers, and I have the E-Strike, so I can probably do 2 attacks this turn. but it's going to be a little difficult to line it all up simply because, you know, with these cards in hand, Flock of the Featherwalkers has an awkward additional cost requirement of revealing a cost in hand, and combined with Enlightened Strike's requirement of sending a card back, I realized that I need a bunch of cards to actually do this turn as much as I want, so I only block with my Skullcap and I take 2 damage. Again, you know, kind of risky to do that at these life totals, but I'm hoping to get a very big turn here. So what I'm thinking I'm going to do is I do the blue Overpower and swing Dawnblade, and then I can potentially follow that up either with the E-Strike 5 Go Again. So if I end up getting through with this attack, I can E-Strike 5 Go Again and then come in with the Dawnblade for 4. And if I don't end up getting through, I can potentially Flock of the Featherwalkers, revealing that E-Strike, setting up my next turn to be even bigger. And so overall, I have a lot of threat here. If he blocks with just 1 card, I'm going to try to break through with the Iron Song response. And then if he plays a defense reaction after that, I might be in a really good spot to follow up with a big attack. So this is a pretty strong situation with Unconditional Go Again, a Dawnblade attack that is potentially going to be buffed by a attack reaction, and then some good attack actions to choose from in hand. We will see what happens here. Yeah, so he goes for the single block, and I do play the Iron Song response for +3. Now, one thing that I could do here if this gets in is that I could just say that's fine and go for the attack for 4, threatening more cards in hand. But I decided this isn't the time for bluffing. It's more a time for big firepower because my opponent is so low on life. So I come in with Enlightened Strike for 5 Go Again, and I'm going to be able to follow this one up by buffing the Dawnblade up to 4 and then swinging. So he blocks with another card, taking 2 damage. Now I'm going to use Bracers and swing Dawnblade for 4. This will probably be another card plus his armor. Now, the downside of this approach is that because I don't have a card in hand anymore, he no longer is worried about a potential attack reaction, and he doesn't have to do any overblocks or anything. But I also managed to chip 2 damage in and get another card out of his hand with the E-Strike, so I think it's fine. And that breaks up his last point of armor. So overall situation looking pretty good. And then he's going to swing Dawnblade here for 4. I'm thinking about my hand. Once again, I have a really aggressive hand. I can do Spoils of War, swinging the Spoils of War and swing Dawnblade, and then I can follow that up either with the Command and Conquer or with the E-Strike. So this is a really excellent hand. And I end up once again deciding I want to keep this hand. I'm just going to block with my armor. And so now I'm going to go Spoils of War, Dawnblade for 5. I'm appreciating having put the Spoils of War back into my deck with the Remembrance. I think putting these big attack cards and the Spoils of War back in has allowed me to maintain a lot of threats here in a way that, you know, I might be running lower on threats by this stage in the game normally, even though I was pitching some of my stronger cards earlier. But with those Remembrances kind of refueling me, I'm able to keep up a lot of pressure here in a way that I think is quite positive. So I'm coming in for 5 with Go Again, and if this hits, I'll get 2 copper. Now, he's actually blocked all my Dawnblade swings from Spoils of War, or I've forgotten to take copper every time. So that's kind of funny. So he ends up blocking for 6, and then he actually blocks for 9, and that means this is a great opportunity for me because now I can use my Tunic to play the CNC, and I still have the E-Strike. So use the Tunic and CNC coming in for 6, and my opponent actually says good game because the last card that he had in his hand was a copy of Remembrance, which can't block. So he blocked heavily there to try to stop me short. The card in Arsenal was a Crippling Crush, and so this CNC for 6 is actually going to end the game and get me the victory in the West Coast. This is the West Coast Playtest League Season 2. It was actually... Now, this was actually a sponsored event from the classic online store FAB Foundry. So fabfoundry.com. They have some cool singles and stuff. And they have been quite good at putting on some of these events. So this was the first season of this West Coast event, this was actually, I'm sorry, this was the expanded version. So this was the West Coast part of the playoffs, but there's actually going to be another tournament this coming weekend, which is going to be, it's going to combine the Western and the Eastern division. So a while ago there was a West Coast only league, and then he expanded the league to be both West and East. So we're going to have a tournament between the people in both leagues, but I did win the like regional or divisional or whatever you want to call it here for the West Coast group. So that was fairly solid. I'm going to have to go back. There was a claim that I had forgotten to shuffle after a singing steel blade in the chat. I'm going to have to go back and make sure that was true. If so, I need to contact my opponent in the TO to apologize and see if, you know, they want to assess any penalty for me or whatever. It was unintentional, but obviously that would be quite bad if it was something that someone was doing as an intended tactic. However, I still think this was an interesting game. And ultimately, I was able to pull out this victory, which is fortunate because I had Ruby had actually defeated me with a similar deck against a similar deck of mine in the what event was that? That was the the first season ladder finals. His Guardian defeated my Warrior, and we've had a mixed record, but it's definitely a deck that I think has a bit of an edge against Warrior, and to be fair, I'm going a little wider to try to get around some of that defensive stuff in a way that not all Warriors are doing, but Guardian is still fairly strong with all the armor and defense reactions and stuff, so I was happy to be able to pull this one out. Wizard of Alf says, ended up getting stuck and losing him the game. Yeah, that crippling crush in Arsenal. I wasn't sure what that was. At a point, I was worried it was going to be an unmovable or something. It was going to like really blow me out. But fortunately for me, it was a big attack. And in these last turns, I was putting on enough pressure that he couldn't really afford to wait and get a really big turn. And as my life total was dipping lower and I was using my armor, I was realizing, you know, if he gets the chance to do a really big attack, that could be the game. So my plan was to just keep up the pressure and tempo, and hopefully he wouldn't get a chance to play it. And luckily for me, that is what ended up happening, with the very high pressure from the go-agains allowing me to do attacks into attack action cards and stuff like that. It ended up paying off, and I was able to take this one. So interesting game for sure. And yeah, that's going to do it for this broadcast. I want to just give a quick call out though. In about 8 minutes, I believe, there is a TCG player deal on it's a Monarch pre-order where it's a box of Monarch First Edition, and it is also a copy of it is also 2 cold foil promotional cards. That is going to go live in about 8 minutes. At 9:00 p.m. Eastern time in the United States. I strongly recommend, I think they only ship to the US. I'm not 100%, but I think they only ship to the US, maybe Canada also. But if you are in one of those areas, and maybe even if you're not, I would check that out because I think it's going to be a very good deal. It is, I believe, $110 for a copy of for a Monarch First Edition booster box, and additionally for 2 cold foil promo cards. So that is a very hype deal, and if it does end up, if you do end up managing to get a spot in just a few minutes, I think you will appreciate that in the long run. And I don't know for sure, you know, maybe Monarch will be terrible, but, you know, we'll have to see. Wizard of Alf in chat saying the double remembrance on your side was clutch. Yeah, it's really interesting. I felt unlucky when I drew that second remembrance, but I actually think that putting those Spoils of War back ended up being really important, because having those Spoils of War later on really let me keep up the pressure. And I don't know, it's interesting. It kind of makes me think, you know, maybe I should be thinking more about using that in the future, remembrance for spoils in particular, rather than just the big attack cards. I'm gonna have to do some thinking about that. But yeah, remembrance is a very solid card in the right circumstance, and I don't run it in most matchups, but for these matchups, for this matchup and for Control Ninja, where I think it's going to be grindier, I do like playing that remembrance to try to get some of my threats back, and it definitely paid off this time. Alright guys, that's going to do it for this stream. Thank you guys for watching. I'm going to have some more content coming up soon. I think that there's a good chance that I will be playing in more tournaments this weekend, whether that be skirmish events or whether that be other classic constructed events. I currently plan to play at least 1 skirmish and 1 classic constructed, and I'm hoping to have potentially tournament reports and or some videos from those that I'll be able to show you guys later. So that's going to do it for this broadcast, guys. Thank you all for watching. If you want to see some written content, including my past skirmish tournament reports, which I've written like 5 of, check out my blog, towernumber9.com, there in the bottom right-hand corner. And if you feel like trying to score a sweet Monarch pre-order deal, check out the TCG player deal in about 5 minutes. I think it could be quite valuable. Actually, that's an alarm that I set to remind me for when it was 5 minutes until the deal went live, so that I could get on there and try to be quick. I think this one's going to go fast, but so if you're interested, I would definitely check that out. All right, guys, that's all for now. Thanks again for watching, and we'll be back later with some more Flesh and Blood content.